Hello and welcome to our event, Unseen Architecture Part 1, which we're proud to present in collaboration with Musicity. My name's Amy Croft and I'm the Curator of Exhibitions and Events for Sto. Sound, architecture and acoustics are weighty disciplines in their own right, and very rarely are they discussed together. This is what excited us at Sto when we heard about the concept for Musicity EXPO, which is curated by Luscombe and Clare Farrow. They've commissioned 7 new experimental sound works, composed in response to acoustic qualities of 7 unrealised or imagined architectural projects. But it's not just the overlapping of disciplines in this project, which is exciting for us. It's the space Musicity EXPO offers for the architects, sound artists and musicians, some of whom you'll hear from today, and now us as the audience of these works and this discussion. The space we are all given by this project is to imagine in our mind's eye and ears what an architectural idea could sound like and how sound could shape an architectural idea. What could it feel like to experience a space where what we can see and what we can hear sit in perfect composed harmony together? And what could this kind of projective thinking, how could that affect the architecture of a building if its acoustics were considered at its design stage? As a manufacturer of a range of acoustic systems, which can be used to control sound reverberation, the technical know-how and scientific understanding of the moulding of sound in space is part of our day-to-day business. But it's these types of questions and fantastical thinking about the possibilities of sound, architecture and acoustics which challenge us and make us grow. We're honoured to hear from such an exceptional panel of speakers today on exactly these subjects. And to introduce them individually, I'll now hand over to our host, Musicity founder, Luscombe. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amy, and big thanks to Sto Werkstatt for their support, and also, of course, to the London Design Festival 2020. We've just relaunched Musicity after 10 years of work with a new version called Musicity EXPO. The first one features the work of 7 architects and 7 sound artists who each kind of respond to each other's work, particularly the sound artists responding to the architecture. And we've got 2 of the architects today. We've got 2 of the sound artists and musicians as well. And we've also got a second panel, which we'll tell you about later, but that's something to look out for on the 1st of October. So a kind of second edition of what we're doing today. And just to say, the whole of this expo, the Musicity EXPO, has been co-curated very kindly by Clare Farrow from Clare Farrow Studios. So onto the panel, we've got Elsie Owusu and Abe Rogers, known for their work in architecture and design, of course. Plus we've got sound artists and musicians, Yuri, Suzuki and Chisara, Agor. We'll hear from everybody today, thanks to the magic of Zoom, of course. And thank you very much for everybody who's joined us today. We hope you enjoy the next hour or so. There'll be time at the end for questions as well, so keep thinking of those, otherwise I'll have to do it, and I don't want to do that. So first up, we'll kind of go around the imaginary table. Perhaps we could just ask everybody to say hello and just briefly kind of tell us what they do. Yuri, okay. Yuri, could you start?
Yeah, my name is Yuri Suzuki. I'm kind of sound artist and a designer, like doing like multi-distributionary, like both installation and also sound design. And then I'm basically like using sound as material to investigate the relation between human and object.
Thanks very much. Let's go. I'm looking on my screen to kind of pick out people. Chisara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chisara. I'm a musician and sound design. Now I'm really excited to be part of this project. I work with like in a singer-songwriting field, but also in a kind of sound design field, theatre kind of industry, making sounds and creating narratives and collaborating with different artists.
Brilliant, thanks a lot. And then go around the table, Abe Rogers, if you could do a little introduction of yourself, if that's possible.
Yep, hi, I'm Abe Rogers. I am a designer. We work a lot with architecture and interiors and spaces and trying to create spaces that are really designed around the senses, to engage all the senses. So sound, acoustics, as well as kind of smell and texture become a really important part of that. And it's been a great honor to be taking part in this project and to be waking up a space which was otherwise, a concept space which is otherwise asleep.
Nice, thank you. If you don't mind, Abe, would you be happy to start and talk us through your presentation and describe a couple of amazing projects that you've been working on?
Sure, certainly. I think you're in complete control of our screen at the moment.
Yeah, we've got James in the background who's feverishly trying to get the right. There we go.
Fiendishly James, they call him.
All right.
So, I mean, start, if you could go to the first slide to give me something. So, we've just completed Maggie's at the Royal Marsden, which is a little standalone building for people who have been affected by cancer to come and spend time and to deal with all the associated issues. It's completely non-medical. It's a space where it's about humanism. So we need to engage and and liberate the spirit of the visitors. So nothing is more important than the senses in doing so. So the whole building is designed around the sun path, and as we come around, the sun enters into the building. So everything that you touch needs to have a kind of tactility to it. So we've made all the door furniture, the handles, all from kind of hand carved wood. They become little sculptures. But that is further down the line. So we start off with this fan of light receiving windows as it spins around. We worked with an amazing landscape gardener, designer called Pete Ordorf, and who then nurtured our building with this extraordinary planting. You've got to remember, we're in the middle of a giant hospital complex, which is really brutal. So we want to make this little nurture environment where you can escape from the hospital for a moment and have a sense of reprieve. Next, please. So then once we have these collection of cells, which are really designed around the way you use the space and you interact with the space, we then start to furnish it in a very bespoke manner. But maybe part of the furnishing is to think of how the soundscape might work, or how soundscapes can work inside it. Next, please. So you enter the space, and then you can go into these more intimate rooms, or you come into the big central space, which is all designed around a kitchen table, and people come together and they discuss the emotions and their feelings. And when the building's really working, people start smiling. And and these moments of distress, it's really important to smile and even to laugh, because it becomes a sense of escape. And we started to see design at this perspective as being the third healer in a way. You have the doctor, the nurse, and then you have the space. And what can the space do to make you feel better? And indeed, what can the sound do to make you feel better? And I know Nick's been working on an amazing project with in Tokyo with the hospitals on creating sounds that give you that bring your spirits alive. And sorry, my dog's just started coming through. So we go into the main building, and we have these. We've wrapped the architecture in this terracotta. The terracotta is dug from the earth. And so it acts as this kind of armory to protect you when you're inside, but it also acts as a beacon. So the exterior gets bent around the roof and creates this complete object, this collection of little chambers that go through. So even the lights, I went to Italy and hand glazed, but they're made from the same terracotta as the building. So everything becomes one complete story. And then we have these little chambers, these smaller spaces in kind of darker colors for contemplation. The little sofa placed inside the wall with a skylight, light pouring on top of you. So light comes from any direction. You can always see a way out. You never feel hemmed in. You never feel claustrophobic. Next. And then these are just kind of other types of spaces designed around different people. And we continue through. And then finally the garden, this kind of the greenery that starts to come into the building, that enters the spirit and frames the views. But with alongside doing the projects of Maggie's and other hospital projects we're doing, we created a concept which we for a competition at the Wellcome Collection, which was about buildings that make you better, was the name of the exhibition. So we wanted to create this kind of pavilion that could be inserted in a hospital. Next. Because that's what the interrelationship is, and that's what this whole project is based around. So I think Lorraine James has composed this piece of soundscape which to go with this unbuilt structure. The unbuilt structure was based around the idea of creating an oasis that you could plug into a hospital, which would funnel daylight into the hospital, that would have very acoustic properties and would have soundscapes played throughout. So like a little multi-sensory swimming pool without water. And it was built out of using bandages and plaster, like very much like when your leg is broken. So the idea of creating an architectural metaphor of fixing broken bodies through these kind of multi-sensory marinations. And we sadly didn't win the competition. We came second, and only to be beaten by my father, which is always quite embarrassing in these situations, being somewhat older. But it's a project we've always been really keen on, and it very much goes back to our whole kind of ethos of architecture as a kind of as a healer. And when Nick asked us to come up with a project which we could add a sound to, or we could use as a basis to commission a sound around, it seemed the perfect project. This is kids and adults on the outside drawing on the building as they would on their plaster casts, and this is people kind of bathing in the natural light. When people spend a lot of time in hospital, they really get hospital illness, which is a kind of the denial of the sensory engagement. So I suppose this is about reuniting. So I think probably that's taken my 10-minute slot to an extent, but very open to any questions or expansions upon the subject.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I mean, I was going to ask you about just one question. We'll definitely have time for questions at the end, but with the Lorraine James track, I mean, how did you, because I guess when you hand over a project to a musician or a sound artist, you never know what you're going to get, do you? So what was your response? Did you feel it kind of connected? Did it take a couple of times?
I think when you hand over a project to a collaborator, you don't know what to expect, and that sense of surprise is really important. For me, it completely brings the space alive, and I thought it was very interesting. Just playing the music of that one image at the beginning is that you start to really run your imagination, and you can really hear these moments bouncing around the space. It feels very three-dimensional. And so I suppose it unlocked the spatial qualities that the drawings can only go so far, and then this is the next iteration to an extent.
Fantastic, yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That was a really speedy kind of run through. Like I said, we'll talk more afterwards, but maybe we could jump to Yuri if we're able to hear you. Yuri, are you able to unmute your? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay. Apologies,
Right.
but we'll get back to you in a second. Yeah, Yuri, would you like to tell us about your project that you worked on for Musicity EXPO, please?
Of course. Is it possible to share my screen if possible? Yeah, seems like it's possible, isn't it? So I'm sharing it now. So it's really beautiful. Like it's really pleased to, and also very honored to, kind of creating music for like Unzip House, like such an iconic and beautiful house like Richard Rogers created. So as you can see, and once I saw the picture, it's really like simplicity and beauty in there. Then I'm just kind of considering I'm not really like kind of a narrative like based kind of composition person. So what I thought about it, what if like we can look this structure as musical instruments, that's the starting point of this project. So this like J-pop house has got a really huge kind of like blank space inside, and I thought it's going to be amazing acoustic chamber. At the same time, like, what if we can like put strings like from like top to end, and we can tuning it, and we can treat it as huge like a guitar or instrument. At the same time, has got structure like need to have wire tension in the bottom, so we could use these like element as kind of percussive instruments. So like a very speculative thought about creating like a composition based on like kind of around 8 percussionists on like a J-pop house and kind of playing one specific composition. So we calculated from like a scale of this like house itself, and we can calibrate how much reverb we can get and what kind of string acoustic we can get. And we created for simulator on the Ableton Live. Can you see on my screen?
Yeah.
So if I see here, like kind of basically like string simulator in here, like I hope you can hear the sound. Probably you can hear, like I hope. sorry. So if you can see here, and we basically try to creating like a simulation of these sounds. So this basically bowing, and we kind of try to make kind of bespoke like patch on Ableton Live and creating. And also this is more about pitch cut effect. And we can actually control like metal and also pick strengths. And also it's really about, we try to be accurate as possible how we can fit into like this architecture and what sound coming from. So that's basically the reflection, and all composition is really kind of like sometimes quite aggressive, quite a metallic sound, quite percussive. And I can play a little bit for that. So this initial sound is coming from really bowing of the one of the strings. So it's going to be really, really strong like sound. So like this acoustic simulation, like bowing the like one of the kind of strings and how that sounds like. So that's kind of my reflection to like this brief actually. Like, does it really clear?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's such an iconic building, isn't it? Or, obviously it was a kind of 60s kind of dream zip up thing, and you've responded in a really physical kind of way to this kind of vision. And how do you feel? I mean, listening back to it, you must be pleased with it, right?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, like until like we are calibrating and like simulating like reverb, what kind of reverb sound coming up, and once like we made that patch, like surprising sound really, really like pleasant in a way. So as the instruments like working really well, so that was really good like fast progress. And the secondary, like what makes sense as a composition, it's like using kind of strengths and also characteristic of the that like kind of instrument itself, but at the same time like really want to link with kind of aesthetic of the like the zip-up house as well. So sounds a bit more like scary kind of feeling for the music. So like a little bit far away from like aesthetic, but the actual acoustic is really makes sense coming out from this architecture.
Yeah, it's sort of definitely true to the kind of structure, isn't it? Which you can see in those initial drawings of yours as well, which are really fun as well, I think, right?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's pretty much insight of this project.
Nice one. Thank you very much. Okay, Elsie, are we able to hear you this time?
There you go.
Yay! Great. Apologies. So thanks a lot, Elsie. So your project. First of all, we have to ask you just to do a brief introduction, if you don't mind.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, my name's Elsie Owusu, and I'm an architect, and most of my work is in London, UK. Not necessarily London, but UK, Ghana, and Nigeria.
Excellent, thank you. And the project that you've kind of submitted, or however you want to call it, to the Musicity EXPO is called A Gallery for Returning Treasures, which has got a really interesting history, but it's also something that is very much still active, and more so it seems now than ever possibly. Can you give us a bit of history or background to the history of the project?
Yes, well, ever so briefly. It started off as a student competition in 1995, and it was being promoted by the Africa Reparations Movement, which was led by the MP Bernie Grant, who was one of the first black MPs to be elected to the UK Parliament, which was very important to the transatlantic slave trade and the importation, exportation of enslaved people from Africa. So it seemed a fitting site. So the prerequisite was that it should be people of African descent, and that wasn't based on a racial identity. It was more of a geographical and cultural association. And that was considered to be a really extreme demand to make in those days. But scroll forward to 2000 and where we are now, and especially in the light of Black Lives Matter, that it seems that it's just become part of a conversation, a cultural conversation. So I was really delighted to be invited to rethink or remember this piece. We have been working on it ever since then in various forms with the V&A currently, and Afford UK, who have just launched a new report commissioned by President Macron. The Open Society, George Soros, has very kindly sponsored work and a report. And there is a very lively conversation between the key stakeholders, which are not just the British Museum, but the likes of Oxford University, because the artifacts which were taken, plundered, looted, some were bought legitimately, are held in various institutions all around the country. So I think it's important to realise that this process and empire is not just, you know, the sort of headline in the news, but is part of our everyday lives as we walk around London and the cities of the UK, and that this culture is essentially built on the labour and the lives and the toil of millions of enslaved Africans. So it was a real pleasure to meet Chisara and Clare, and to talk, and you online, and to talk through the history of the project, and an absolute delight to hear Chisara's take on the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic project to be involved in. We've got some images as well, which we can share with everybody watching, so they can get a sense of what this is all about. So perhaps you could, you've kind of given a great overview, but maybe just perhaps we could look at some of these images as well and just give us some context to these. So that's a kind of screenshot from our website where you can basically hear the track.
Yes. So I think the great thing that I've learned about this process, and particularly the artifacts from Ghana, is that, and it's completely changed my view about the taking of the artifacts, is that in actual fact, this was a confrontation, the 1874 raid, the so-called punitive raid on the city of Kumasi by the British troops, was actually a confrontation between two empires, the Ashanti Empire and the British Empire. And the Ashanti Empire was refusing to be subjugated by the British Empire. So the confrontation, which was a very bloody one, was between two states, two powers, who considered themselves to be equal. Whether the British considered the Ashanti to be equal or not, the Ashantis considered themselves to be absolutely equal to the British. So these beautiful items which were taken were stolen from the Ashanti, from Kumasi, and brought back to the UK by General Wolsey, who was awarded £25,000, a lot of money for his trouble, having burnt Kumasi to the ground. And these items were bought, as you can see, by various institutions, the V&A, the British Museum, with a view, actually, so they said, to showing artisans how craft, to improve the level of artisanship. Whether you believe that or not is something else. So these are the subject of the request for return from the present king, Otumfuo Osei II. And the fascinating story in 1900, this is Queen Mother Nanaya Santua, who took up arms against the British after the 1875 raid, and she stood up to the British, who were trying to seize the Golden Stool, which was an important throne of state. And she refused. She led the troops, the Asante troops, who refused to hand over. She was captured, and with members of the Asante royal family and their retinue, they were they were exiled to the Seychelles. And she died in the Seychelles, I think in 1921. And the remainder of the royal family, the Asante royal family, were allowed to return in 1923. So it's all within living memory. And there are people who, these are not just historical artifacts, there are people whose families are the custodians of these precious items and are eagerly awaiting the return of these treasures. So it's a real privilege to find people in Ghana and in the UK who are working very hard towards restitution and return.
And there is, am I right, there is an actual space as well that you've identified, which is going to become the actual, the gallery space, is that the idea?
Yes, that's right. So there are a number of sites, a number of available sites. So we're working on a city hall in Kumasi, which has a space for a small gallery and up-to-date facilities for curating, for analysis, because these are very delicate items and need to be cared for at the highest level. This building is a building which was commissioned by a very enlightened governor, Governor Gugisberg, who was governor of the Gold Coast, and his wife was a suffragette, amazingly enough. And he made an argument for equality, equal standing between the population of the Gold Coast as it was. And he built this school, and this school was attended by various dignitaries, including the former president and the present king, I think, all attended this school. And it's been given by the king as a potential site. So we've got a number of potential sites, but this is a lovely old building in need of care and restoration.
For sure.
Yeah. So I think that's. Do you have another slide? I thought I saw another slide. Well, no, that's fine.
Maybe there's one more, but that might be it.
Yeah. So this is
Yeah.
The point about empire, and empire being the way that people used to do things. So this is a cast of a decapitated head of an enemy of the Ashantis, I believe, we believe. And of course, the point about it being an everyday part of everyday life is that my friend Yadana Korbila believes that this might be one of his ancestors who's defeated. So it's not a simple matter of just returning the items to Ghana. These are part of people's everyday lives and ancestral history. So it's quite complex.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining it, and detailing it in that way. Like you said, it was interesting to kind of think about how we put a musical context on this. And we're really lucky to be able to work with Chisara Agor, who's worked with the project with Musicity before. If we could perhaps bring in Chisara just before we hear your track. Can you tell me how you approach? Because obviously we had a Zoom call with Clare Farrow, who, like I mentioned earlier, is the co-curator of this project, and with Elsie. And we kind of, you guys got to talk about this a bit more, and then you went away and made a piece of music, and we had no idea how you would respond to it. So how did you, what were your initial kind of thoughts about that?
It was so much to go on. Like speaking to Elsie that on that Zoom call was amazing, because even as she was explaining earlier, all the different complexities about what happened, the two empires, this kind of idea we have about that time and the legacy that continues today, and the kind of ways that governments behave today that links back to those times. It's all very also overwhelming to think, okay, how can I capture all of this in a piece of music? Which I realized quite quickly that was impossible. So I think what we spoke about a lot was the Queen Mother, Nana Ya Santua, who stood up to the British and kind of led this rebellion, and that really spoke to me. And I thought about kind of zooming in on what that is of a woman leading an empire against another empire, and what happened during that time of defending the treasures and then being taken. Especially what kind of initially spoke to me was the idea of being banished to another place beyond the sea, that people their followers and their couldn't get to them. And so that was kind of like what starts and ends the piece, and what really spoke to me in regards to the movement of bodies, the movement of artworks and artifacts and cultural icons that were taken and had to be taken across these oceans. Especially Liverpool being a port as well, the kind of all water connecting all these stories. So yeah, that was kind of my initial thought.
Yeah. So, and it becomes, I mean, again, it's quite cinematic, isn't it? It feels like you're kind of living parts of that story when you listen to it, and you know, yeah, for sure. Perhaps we should have a listen to a bit of it. Maybe we could do that now, and then we can have a quick chat afterwards about it. Well, that's a good place as any to stop, perhaps. I mean, the whole thing is continues in that way, but it's fantastic, and it's such a wonderful response. to that work. You know, it's quite amazing. And to hear the whole thing, you just need to check out musicity.space to hear the whole track, obviously. But thank you for sharing it. I think we should move into kind of more of a general discussion, but perhaps we could start with you, Chisara, about the idea of writing music for space and for conceptual space and ideas like that. How does that differ for you to kind of the other work that you do? Is there a completely different approach when you have to work with these kind of concepts?
I think that there's definitely more, you're thinking really in detail about what people are feeling when they've got the headphones on, and trying to immerse people in a world rather than necessarily following a melody or a structure, which is quite freeing because then you kind of just can go anywhere. And also I love the idea that you can play with silence and you can play with themes for a longer time because you're trying to create that connection with people. So there's loads of space, and I love space, and you can add anything, there's little details that enhance what you're trying to get across, which is really exciting.
So kind of like architecture, it's a lot to do with the space as much as the actual
exactly.
fabric of the, for sure. Elsie, just thought I'd ask you a question at this point as well about kind of sound in your work. Does sound, can you think of any examples where sound has maybe played a part in your design thinking for any of the architecture that you've developed or worked on?
Actually, yes. It just occurred to me. When again with the late great Bernie Grant, I was working on a project which and quite about 200-seater, and quite in my thinking quite a large auditorium, about 600 seats. That was such a daunting task, but it was really interesting because it led me to think about what it felt like to occupy a space like that with your voice. So I started learning how to sing opera, and that really changed my life.
to get to feel the to get a feel for the space.
Just to get to feel what it was like to occupy a space not with your body, but with your voice. I must say that the woman who is teaching me said, "I think you're a little brown mezzo, dear. I don't think you're ever going to be a great soprano." But listening to that, listening to Chisara's work is just kind of a condensation of that experience. And I see somebody just put up a question: did I hear a little bit of Rule Britannia? And so, you know, bringing in those echoes of experience and life and aspiration is just great. So this is maybe the second or third time I've worked with sound and space, but this has definitely been the most inspirational experience.
Wonderful stuff. Abe, I know that sound is very important to your thinking. I mean, can you explain maybe, is there something that you've worked on that has kind of been born out of a kind of sound side of the project rather than a kind of physical space?
I think, and we're always trying to get you involved in projects that we're working on it because we really find it interesting, the tension between sound and space. But for me, sound has an amazing fluidity which architecture struggles to have, I think. And there's an immediateness to sound which can transform a space so quickly. Whereas buildings, they're really, even at the quickest, they're quite slow to produce. And once they're produced, they're quite hard to make ephemeral. And we've been doing a lot of work in Wonderfruit, which is a kind of a music festival in Thailand. And there, the whole master plan is based upon sound. And the beauty of that is it becomes circular because sound is not linear, of course. And so it's kind of trying to overlap these different spaces, and then trying to find, you know, and then enjoying the moments where the sounds clash or bleed over each other. But then also, I think what was interesting that Chisara was saying before, which is about the absence of sound within sound. So trying, one of the most important places, the bathhouse, which is a series of floating structures where it's almost silent. And when you've been in a festival for 3 days, you kind of want to escape for a moment and you want that tranquility. And there's nothing that makes you enjoy sound more than the absence of it to an extent. But for me, I think where we're trying to retake our work at the moment is looking at ways to make architecture which we can dissolve, so there's much less physicality. And I think at that point can have a much greater interrelationship with sound, because they both become more ephemeral, and it's trying to escape the concrete as a scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Yuri, as someone who designs physical things, such as, you've designed some amazing kind of musical instruments, but also you make music as well. Is there a difference between those two processes for you, or are they kind of bound up as the same thing?
I think my process to make something is kind of not only the kind of outcome of some sonic experience, also the kind of way of the kind of creating tools and also acoustic as well. So kind of whole process is kind of really linear in a way. Like, for example, first of all, thinking about what kind of context and also what kind of sounding can create for musical instrument, and the composition should fit into that potential of that instrument, and also playback as well. And it's not only on installation, I would say, to think about it, we are doing a lot of like sound design for companies as well. And we have to think about what kind of environment like sound to be played from, like your kind of iPhone speaker. That's probably one of the worst kind of acoustic you can get, or like you can get from like a television and also like smart speaker and so on. Like acoustics totally different in the way. So like what I'm excited to me a lot for like these days is really about sound is not only about composition, it's also about kind of how to fabricating it, how to play back. So both sides, and also like kind of environment as well, of course, like what kind of room you're playing sound. So that's really about it. So I think kind of for me, it's kind of whole process is kind of continuously like one line, like not only composition, there's also thinking about physical aspect as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, today's talk, it's been supported by Sto, who are kind of known for their acoustic systems for spaces. And what they do is they develop those kind of early stage kind of conversations with architects, designers, to make sure that the sound is very integral to the architecture, to the fabric of the building. This is just to anybody really, but is that relationship becoming more important? So as architects, do you feel that there is more to be done there, or do you think we're at the beginning of this? What are your thoughts on that relationship?
For me, when we're designing spaces, the acoustic potential for space is really important. Whether it is you want to hear everyone murmuring or whether you want to remove it. In Maggie's particularly, we're really interested in hearing the softness that sound makes the space feel less sterile. But obviously you don't want to hear an intimate conversation of a person next door to you. So we spend a lot of time looking at absorbency and reflection and how we can use that as an unseen layer within the architecture.
Right. Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think for me, I've always thought of sound in a sort of negative way in architecture. More how to keep sound out and how to control sound. But I think this experience has really made me think about allowing sound in and allowing sound to become an integral part of the architecture. And also thinking of working with Chisara, just thinking of sound makers as part of a team in a positive way, rather than as a technician who will help to where I need to get in order to make the space quiet. So I think this has been a really important, for me, it's been a really important experience. And so now thinking about other projects and competitions and so on, I'm just thinking, we need sound makers as part of our team in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, the potential for that is huge and really exciting, isn't it? I think. Chisara, I mean, as somebody, I mean, you live in London, right? So the sonic environment of the city can be quite intense. I'm curious, your relationship with kind of, it's the same for everybody really, but just asking you, putting you on the spot, your relationship between the sound of space as you kind of move around in the area you live in, and how architecture sounds to you. You know, do you have any, is there anything you would like to do differently? So if Elsie was about to do a kind of amazing building in your neighborhood, how would you like it to kind of sound, if you like? What would be your experience that you would ideally want?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think buildings do have a kind of sound, and they definitely affect sound. They affect the way it travels, and I guess it reflects the people that exist within a space and the community. I feel, for me, if Elsie was to put a building in where I live, so in Peckham, it would be a building that allows everyone's voices to be heard and kind of can run through this space, and kind of reflects the sounds that already existed, or the kind of, and not just, you know, the people kind of visiting, but the people who've made an area what it is, kind of the everyday sounds that are maybe sometimes considered not as beautiful or harmonic as other sounds, but could be made to be so, and have made the place what it is. That makes sense. Yeah, something that isn't kind of oppressive, but opening and welcoming. I guess. I think buildings can definitely shape even the way we use our voices, or the way we move around spaces. We can feel intimidated by buildings or spaces that we don't feel accustomed to. But certain spaces can open up to people communicating. And I guess that's the kind of space that I would imagine being built.
Yeah, interesting.
There's an amazing installation in Cocoon in the north of Spain by Chisara, and he somehow captures the sounds of the sea and plays it back to you. So as soon as you walk into the center of this circle, you have this incredible sound, and you step to a foot away and it disappears. And it's completely without any electronics or mechanics. It just vacuums it from the sea over there up into, and I find this so magical. It's about to harness sound in this way.
That sounds amazing. And that may be something, Yuri, you're now a coastal dweller, right? So you're out in Margate these days from East London, right? How has your perception of sound changed, like living kind of by the sea and having that around you? Has it kind of altered any of your kind of thinking, that kind of sonic environment?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of great change in the way, because kind of like I feel like quite settled noise. Like I think human being is actually really comfortable with like white noise, and particularly, and which is actually quite similar to like inside of mother's body. So like it's in general, people go to seaside and like listening to like web sound, it's actually categorized as white noise in the way. So I think definitely like soundscape is really improved a lot for me, because like once I'm a bit tired with kind of work and so on, like just going to the like beach and listening sound of the waves, that really soothing effect and psychologically working quite well at the moment. And also yeah, I think definitely like some part of the, like, because that's village, like kind of town, so it's not much people in there. So some part we can definitely find a silent spot that cannot hear much sound. So which is quite a luxury experience to compare to like living in the city side. But of course, like I do love noise of the city, noisiness of the people and the shouting and the kind of honking car. I like it too. But at some point, like I need to have some sort of space to like just without any sound as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, can I just
yeah,
because that's just reminded me of something. And in Chisara's piece, the ocean becomes not a place of contemplation and the sound of the sea, which we associate with peace and sort of tranquility and positive things. But for thousands and thousands of people who'd never been near an ocean, to be transported 5,000 miles across the sea to a new place makes the sea a very different experience. And, you know, if you've seen those pictures of the diagrams of slave ships, you know, if you can imagine being put on a shelf with hundreds and hundreds of other people who are screaming and crying and dying, with the sound of the sea as a sort of permanent backdrop for days and days and weeks on end. And I think that really comes across in Chisara's piece as, you know, the all-consuming sense of threat, and the sea as not somewhere we go to enjoy, but as a means of deprivation. So I think it's quite interesting to see, to contemplate those differences.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I've asked quite a few questions. I think there are people who are kind of waiting to ask as well. So perhaps we could hand over to anybody who would like to jump in. I think we've got Amy who's looking at our questioners, and I'm just hoping somebody will appear. Hello, Claire.
Hello. I'm unmuted.
You've got a question. Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, so I love the fact that some of the sound artists gave their own titles to their piece. So actually with some of the projects, there are two titles which kind of become one. And I wanted to ask Chisara why she chose her title, and what meaning does it have in relation to Elsie's project?
It was directly linked to our talk with Elsie about some of the objects that were taken from Kumasi, and I think there's an image of it on the slide. It's a soul washer's badge, or soul wash. Elsie tag team here, so just in case I get some bit wrong. But it's is that right? A soul washer's badge, disc that I was really drawn to, that was used for protection by kind of the king or any higher ups in society. I think also I read about it being quite a purifying emblem that kind of restored powers, was thought to kind of protect the wearer. And when I was writing some of the words for the sound piece, I ended up saying, talking about the Queen Mother as her soul washing over me, or washing over people, as her being the symbol of this emblem that protects the nation or the empire. And so, yeah, it just came. I just thought, wow, I love this title, and it links directly to Elsie's research, and I thought of it like metaphorically and also as a physical object, and that was where it came out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the words were really, really powerful and really moving, with the sounds of the waves and the lion. Was it a lion?
Oh, so it was a leopard. And the reason why where that came from was I was doing some research about the Ashanti war drums, and they would play these drums to kind of, before they arrived, to kind of, you know, tell everyone they were arriving in a warring manner. And there was a video on YouTube of someone in Kumasi playing one of these drums, and it sounded like a leopard or like rolling thunder. And so I used the sound of a leopard to kind of demonstrate that was happening, that conflict was about to kind of erupt with the war drums, without having to play a war drum, because I don't have one. So that was my way in.
Thank you. It was very powerful. So
thank you.
I'll let some other people ask some questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, I believe we've got another question. Is it Nadja? Nadja, would you like to ask your question?
Hi. Yes, I was wondering, just in terms of sound, that you know, I'm imagining, especially, this is maybe a question for Ab, but also others if they want to chip in, for children and adults, is there like a different sense of sound almost? Like, I feel like, you know, their voices are obviously higher, they talk much louder most of the time. Like, the experience for what's soothing for a child might be very different from what's soothing for us, for an adult, and so on. Is there anything in your experience that you could share with us?
If we're talking from an architectural perspective, design perspective, I think it's about softness in a way, isn't it?
Right.
And things which are materials which are more absorbent. Children are quite low down as well, so their sounds tend to get more absorbed, kind of lower down, narrow down the space and the spectrum. But as far as sounds that engage with children, I think it's not so similar. And I find it quite irritating, all this very dumbed down music which are played at kids in the same way that we dumb down food to play at them. I think they can be really engaged by a whole huge wide spectrum of sounds across. But for me, what's most interesting about children is their height, their smallness. And so both acoustically and visually, what they're looking at is often the things that we forget about, the undersides of the table, and therefore what the sound bounces off is also often what we forget at. So people with children often might want to run carpet underside their tables, because then that will absorb those kind of those sounds, or magnify them if in fact you want to magnify the high pitch of your child. We did a nice project for the Tate where to try to explain cubism to under 5s, which is clearly impossible. We thought we could give them the experience of cubism. We attached sounds to objects. As they went down the slide, we made the sound of the violin, and as they went into the water bottle, we made the sound of this kind of bubbling water. We were very careful, because when we did a sound installation in Kuwait back in 2005, we played with really cold sounds of thunderstorms, and everyone in the shopping mall had to go to the toilet all the time to pee because the sounds had that effect. So since then, we've been very careful when using water sounds in public spaces. But yeah, I think I really think you don't need to dumb down. You can enrich sounds for children as much as for adults. But the musicians are better to comment on that than me.
Yeah, what do you think, Yuri or Chisara?
I think in terms of the, I think like sound quality and so on is kind of really affected the kind of growing up process for like children, like process as well, I think. And I think like electronic sound and so on, like sometimes has got a bit negative effect. It's more like acoustic sound. It could be like a better effect for like a growing up brain, but at the same time, it doesn't need sort of like scientific proof in the way, because something quite difficult about sound designs, everything quite not like quite subjective like reason, like people talking about that, like what sound should be. So I think it doesn't need to require to have like what scientific relevance and also evidence for that. But in terms of the kind of education, like for example, like children and like music education, it's tended to be much better to using an acoustic sound, I think. So that's something I can tell at the moment.
Yeah, nice. Chisara, were you going to say something? I saw you leaning forward. I wasn't sure if you were going to comment as well.
Oh, no, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I definitely think relating kind of what they were saying about the different senses and linking them to sound, working with children and using instruments to make sounds or relating some objects with sounds is really interesting, and can also be used in regards to language as well. Language, and I think that combination with associating a sound with a feel or a touch or something that you're visually seeing with language is quite a powerful thing for children especially. Yeah,
for sure. Well, what can I say? Thank you. This has been like amazing. We could definitely talk for a lot more. I think that, there's a lot more to dig into, but it's been a really fascinating discussion, which I thank you all for. I think we probably have to wrap up, but massive thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks to Chisara, to Abe, to Elsie, and to Yuri as well. Thanks everybody who's been out there in Zoom land watching this as well, and hopefully enjoying this. There is another part 2 to this, so that will be on the 1st of October, which Clare Farrow is going to be hosting, the co-curator of this first Musicity EXPO with LDF. Thanks everybody, and yeah, thanks to the London Design Festival, thanks to Sto Werkstatt as well, and thanks everybody who's in the back room, that's James, and also to Amy, who've been helping us get this all happening. So thank you so much, and yeah, thank you everybody.
Thank you, Nick and the team.
Cheers, nice to see everyone.